So, Lone Rider here, and this is something that I was hoping I wouldn't have to talk about, but I heard on the news this morning. This is the 2nd of July, that the death toll for cyclists in New York is basically doubled since this time last year. This is, of course, referring to cyclists in roadway collisions. Um, this is something that's near and dear to me as a cyclist. I mean, I would think anybody would care about people being injured or killed. But in particular, if you're also a cyclist yourself, it hits a little close to home. And it's kind of funny because most of these things are caused by basically preventable error. People doing things that they know they shouldn't be doing. It's common knowledge it's dangerous. It's common knowledge it's in many cases against the law, etc. They do it anyway. Somebody dies, and then people kind of throw up their hands and go, "Woe is me! Whatever could we have done?" Well, if you enforce the dang laws in the first place against things like talking on cell phones, illegally parking, etc., um, maybe this wouldn't be a thing. Now, funny thing, the news people, I mean, not funny, it's actually tragic, but funny in the sense of odd, not funny in the sense of, haha, I gotta bust a gut. Um, the news people on the radio, after they talked about the latest cyclist crash, they talked about how the mayor of New York, de Blasio, who's not even in New York, I don't think, he's busy running around the country campaigning for president right now. But he said something like, well, we're going to make an effort to crack down on illegal and dangerous behavior by drivers that risks havoc for cyclists, such as drivers who illegally park in the bike lane, blocking the cyclist and maybe prompting a collision. You know what? That's great. But shouldn't you have been doing that all along, ever since you installed said bike lane? I mean, think about it. If the only time you ever bother to enforce a law against behavior that's potentially dangerous or deadly is after somebody has died, in fact, after enough people have died that the death toll is double that of last year, and then you say, oh, we're going to start cracking down on this, you should have been cracking down on that from the inception of the bike lane, right? If you're, it'd be like a stop sign. If you put a stop sign in a road that didn't have a stop sign before, right? And then you say 2 years later, after there's been a lot of fatalities, oh, we're going to start enforcing that stop sign now. No, you should have been enforcing the stop sign from the moment you put it there. Are you out of your fracking mind? And keep in mind, all the bike lanes do, they don't confine cyclists. All they do is keep drivers out of a section of the road where a cyclist would normally be riding in many circumstances, not all necessarily. Um, I think a lot of the drivers were kind of told to get them to support the idea of bike lanes that, oh, well, this is to get the bicyclists out of the rest of the street, which is why you have this ignorant idea that, the cyclist should be in a bike lane at all times. No. The bike lane is simply there to teach the drivers proper lane position and keep them from hugging the side of the road or, so you shouldn't park or block that section of street. Simply because, that's most often where you're going to encounter a cyclist. Also, you should have a proper default lane position whether there's a cyclist on the road alongside you or not, right? If you're going at full speed all the way up against the curb, something's wrong with you. Go back to driver's ed. But the thing that amazes me is this statement of, oh, we're going to start cracking down on it now. Well, what else have they been doing in the meantime, right? They've had these bike lanes there for years, and they've been kind of just watching with their thumbs up their butts as the fatalities have doubled over last year. Is that what's really happened? What else have they been doing in the meantime, if not enforcing the laws against things that injure and kill people? Well, I'll tell you what they've been doing. They've been on a social justice crusade. And this is a case where, I always make the argument, if it's justice, why do you need to add a prefix? Justice is justice, right? Anything with a prefix in front of it, that prefix changes the meaning of the word. Social justice is not the same as justice, okay? And we can see that by what's happened. The social justice crusade in New York, for example, has recently led to them to ban styrofoam because it's supposed to be bad for the environment. Now, styrofoam waste products probably are bad for the environment in terms of they're not going to biodegrade. But Is this what the government should be focusing finite resources on while people are being killed and dying in the streets? Right? Um, for that matter, should the government be setting by law what packing material you can and cannot use? Right? Frankly, um, it'd be one thing. Okay, don't dump styrofoam. Have huge fines if somebody's caught dumping it or whatever. Okay, fair enough. But to tell the individual business owner or consumer or man in the street that he can't, when I would go to get a cup of coffee, a lot of times I would choose the styrofoam cup. Why? Because it contains temperature better than the other kind. The other kind, you have to put a little paper sleeve over it, right? Which always falls off, and then you're stuck with a hot coffee cup, etc. Now, sometimes I would just use two coffee cups. I put one inside the other. That's wasteful, but it's the only way to get a paper coffee cup to be as good at insulation as a styrofoam one, or even close. In other words, people were using these materials for a reason. They weren't doing it just because they're evil and they want to kill the earth. They're using these materials because they have in terms of the application of the material in a literal sense, like what it's used for and how it functions and what it does. It has a value, a benefit, or people wouldn't use it, right? So for the mayor to even be like, well, you shouldn't use this, I could say if they want to control, what ends up in landfills and what doesn't, and how it's disposed of to prevent environmental damage in that sense, yes, by all means. But to say to people, you can't buy this product, it's outlawed. Like by itself is wacky. And then you have the fact that they're going to spend time on that. It's not just that they're spending time on that at all. That's bad enough. They're spending time on that instead of addressing issues like people killing other people in the roadways, right? A lot of cyclists do care about the environment. Some might even consider themselves environmentalists. I don't use that term anymore because it's politically charged. And frankly, when I think of environmentalists, I usually just think of hypocrites. The person who talks all about global warming and this and that, and then gets on their private jet and flies back to their big arse mansion. I mean, not for nothing. So I would consider myself a conservationist. I might even call myself an outdoorsman. I wouldn't consider myself an environmentalist, but I do care about the natural world. And I think most people who spend time outdoors, whether it's hiking, biking, horseback riding, hunting, skiing, whatever, they're going to care about the condition of the natural world. They don't want to needlessly pollute, etc. But the question is, as human beings, are they going to say that spending your time going after styrofoam pollution is more important than making sure the death toll for human beings riding bicycles in the city of New York hasn't doubled since the previous year? We've gotten to the point where people are so obsessed with these political trends and signaling how virtuous they are and how pure they are and how down they are with whatever the cool kids are doing now, that we have leaders, grown adults apparently, who would rather spend time on that than discharge their primary duty as a government employee, which is safeguarding the rights and lives of the citizens from violation. Not only violation by the government, but by others as well, such as somebody who might kill you because they can't be bothered not to pay attention. Traffic safety laws exist for a reason, and a lot of these things are illegal: being distracted, being drunk, illegally parking, etc. The fact that they waited until you could actually say, well, hey, the death toll is now double of last year, what it was this time, that says they're not doing their job. The fact that instead of doing their job, they were going on a crusade can't remember the name of the literary character. The guy who was always, he thought he was a knight and he wasn't, and he used to joust at windmills. Yeah, they're jousting at windmills. They're tilting at windmills here. Well, over there, people are dying, right? Now, some accidents are always going to happen on the roadways, but there is a tendency for people to be careless around cyclists, and we do know that drivers use a lot of they do a lot of things they shouldn't be doing behind the wheel. They talk on the phone, they get drunk, they're distracted, they're not paying attention, they don't hold a proper lane position, etc. They don't use signals, they don't stop at stop signs, whatever. And some of these, to be fair, some of these, where applicable, bicycles obviously don't have automated turn signals, and it's not always safe for a cyclist to take his hands off the bars. But generally speaking, you are expected to signal where it's safe or possible to do so on a bicycle. So, for many things, some of these criticisms could also apply to cyclists. It's just there isn't a huge problem with cyclists going around crashing into cars. There is a huge problem with cars going around crashing into cyclists. And if you look at a lot of these collisions, it's operator error on the driver's part. Now the question is, does that mean they simply don't know? Nobody's ever enforced the rules on them, so they literally don't know that what they're doing is wrong? Or is it that they know it's wrong, but they just don't really think about it? Because if they get in a minor accident, it's no big deal for them, whereas the other person could be killed because they're the one protected inside the car. Or is it they literally just figure, well, it's a cyclist, who cares? In which case, you have basically, people's mindset lulling them into committing a vehicular homicide because they believe that, if you're not in a car, you're a second-class citizen. And there are some people who think like this. I honestly am not sure. I wasn't in the mind of that driver. I can't tell you why driver A hit cyclist B. But what I can tell you is there's a widespread problem with drivers hitting cyclists, and a lot of it is due to a misunderstanding of cycling, animosity towards cyclists, and I think misunderstanding of driving too. I think there's a lot of people who don't realize, why do you signal a turn? If you look at what people do in terms of not signaling turns, it'll tell you a lot about whether or not they understand why you're supposed to do it, right? They signal way too late if they signal at all. They've already started to stop or slow down, or they're within, alter their course of speed in some way. So the turn signal, even if they do activate it at that point, it's useless. What it exists to warn people of has already taken place. It exists to warn people that you're altering course or speed. If you've already started to do that by the time you signal, then it's useless. An accident could already have occurred. You've already thrown a monkey wrench into the line of travel and speed of everybody around you. However, here's the interesting part. The fact that you still think it's okay because you signaled, even though you signaled after what you're supposed to be signaling to warn people of had already occurred, it doesn't just make your act of signaling useless, but it illustrates that you don't understand why it's important to signal, right? It's a safety aspect of it. It's not just that, well, somebody made a law that said you have to use a turn signal. There's a safety reason for it, and that's to warn other people that you're going to alter your speed and or your course. Now, if you think signaling after you've altered your speed and or your course is sufficient and complies with the law as well as the underlying safety principles, then you do not understand turn signals or the reasons for their use. So sometimes, we can get a clue as to what's going on with people. It may not tell us exactly why they do something, but it'll point us in the right direction to give us hints. Like, this is the part they don't understand. Right? When it comes to cyclists, I think there's a lot of things people who aren't cyclists don't understand. And to be fair, there's a handful of asinine cyclists, like the people that ride the wrong way or on sidewalks. But among avid cyclists, people who've been doing it a while, people who know what they're doing, those are few. I've never seen it. I've seen people doing it, but they're not people I would call experienced cyclists, if you know what I mean. That said, it does happen. So yeah, there's a handful of asinine cyclists. The thing is, the number of cyclists compared to drivers is fairly small anyway, and most of the cyclists at least are aware that the cars are there. The thing with most drivers who aren't also cyclists is they're almost never even thinking of cyclists. So since they're starting with an overall lack of awareness, it only takes a little screw up to really make something bad happen. Whereas the cyclist, has to do something really wrong, like go the wrong way, because he knows the cars are there, right? Whereas, again, for many of the drivers, it's like, what cyclist? And the thing that bothers me, it bothers me as another cyclist that this happened. It bothers me as an American that people are getting killed in America. It bothers me as a human being that other human beings are killed. But it bothers me even more that rather than try and get to the problem, the government is wasting time outlawing styrofoam containers. Like, are you out of your gourd? And then to say, well, now we're going to try and crack down on it. What you mean you weren't enforcing the law against all these things before? While people were getting killed, you had to wait until the death toll had doubled to be like, hey, I think we're going to start enforcing the law now. Talk about shutting the barn door after the horse is dead, right? I mean, seriously. Um, so I don't know what's going on with these jabronis in New York. As far as I'm concerned, they're a bunch of dummies. But as a cyclist, this is something that bothers me. And maybe, I mean, not for nothing, maybe for the rest of us, it can be a learning thing, right? People all over the country, both in the East Coast, the West Coast, the North, the South, can look at this and be like, this is what not to do. This is how not to run, um, a city in terms of enforcing the traffic laws, right? Waiting until your death toll doubles and then be like, oh, gee, I think we better do something now. Well, what were you doing in the meantime? Oh, we were spending all our time going after styrofoam. Yeah. While people were dying in the streets. Mayor de Blasio, you win the A-hole of the Year award. I mean that, sincerely. From the bottom of my cyclist heart. Lone Rider out.